Welcome to Shadow Fable. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy unsettling stories that crawl under your skin. Tonight's story is about a man seeking help, only to discover that some answers shouldn't be found. Now, dim the lights and listen closely. I started therapy because I couldn't sleep. Not in the dramatic, I'm haunted by ghosts way, more like my mind had turned into a carousel that wouldn't stop spinning, even at 3 a.m. Thoughts about bills, my ex-wife, whether I locked the front door, whether I really locked the front door. I was tired in a way that caffeine couldn't touch anymore. Dr. Halverson came highly recommended. Late 50s, silver hair that made her look both wise and faintly intimidating. Her office was quiet, too quiet, decorated in grays and soft blues like a waiting room that forgot it was supposed to comfort anyone. But I liked her immediately. She didn't ask me to relive my childhood on the first session. She listened, asked questions that made me pause. She got the racing thoughts. She didn't look at me like I was broken, just frayed. In our third session, she mentioned him, a patient she had just like me. He also finds it hard to sleep, she said, folding her hands over her clipboard. Same age, same tendency to catastrophize. He used to check the door 6-7 times a night. I smiled. Sounds familiar. Very. I call him the Watcher, she said, almost playfully. That name stuck with me. The Watcher. The way she said it sounded off somehow. Like it wasn't a nickname she made up, but one he had insisted on. I didn't think much of it until the next week when she brought him up again. Same soft tone, same curious smile. He said something interesting yesterday, she mused, tapping her pen against her knee. He said, "I think the dark listens when I talk." I laughed uneasily. Poetic. She looked at me for a second too long. Yes, very. Weeks went by. The Watcher kept popping up. Not every session, but often enough that I felt like we were sharing therapy space. I'd talk about waking up at 2:17 a.m. with my jaw clenched, and she'd nod and say, "He's mentioned that exact time before, too." A chill climbed up my spine every time she said he. She never used a name, never referred to him as someone she saw before or after me. Just parallel, always present. At first, it felt reassuring, like maybe I wasn't as alone in the storm as I thought. But then came the dream. I was standing in Dr. Halverson's office, but it wasn't her sitting across from me. It was him. I couldn't see his face. Just a pale silhouette, legs crossed, fingers steepled in the same exact way she sat. And he said, in a voice like mine, but distant, "The dark doesn't listen, it remembers." I woke with my nails digging into my palms. I almost canceled my next session, but curiosity won out over fear. "Do you ever talk about me with him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She looked up from her notes. "Why do you ask?" "I mean, if you're telling me about him, maybe you're telling him about me?" Her smile faded. Number. That would be a breach of ethics. I paused. "But you're telling me about him." There was a long silence, a subtle tension in the air, like a held breath. "I suppose I am," she said finally. "But you don't seem to mind." I did, though. I minded a lot. I just didn't say so because part of me still wanted to know what he said next. It got worse after that. I started hearing noises at night, not loud ones, not footsteps or whispers, just a low murmur from inside the walls, like someone talking through insulation. I knew it was probably just pipes, or my imagination. But one night, I pressed my ear to the wall near my bed and froze. It was my therapist's voice. Soft, calm, measured. "And what did you do next?" Then a beat of silence, and another voice, low, rasping, and far too familiar. I watched. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I emailed Dr. Halverson to cancel our session, told her I needed a break. She didn't respond. But a handwritten letter arrived the next day, slid under my apartment door. It read, "You're not alone in this. You never were. Please don't be frightened. Sometimes healing means looking into the dark and letting it look back." No return address, no signature. But I recognized her looping handwriting. Against all logic, I went back. Her office looked the same, but the air felt heavier. She didn't greet me like usual, just gestured to the chair. I sat, waited. "I think," she began slowly, "it's time you met him." My stomach dropped. "What?" She leaned forward. "The Watcher. He's asked about you." I stared at her, my mouth dry. I thought he didn't know about me. Her eyes were very calm, too calm. "He knows now." Then she stood, walked to the corner of the room and opened a door I'd never noticed. Not a closet. It looked more like a narrow hallway, black as pitch beyond the threshold. "I've never invited a patient through here," she said, almost reverently. "But I think you're ready." "Ready for what?" Her smile was kind. "To understand what you've always known." I stood, my legs felt wooden. Something primal in me screamed not to move, not to go through that door. But the carousel in my mind, the endless spinning of what-ifs and maybes, had slowed. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. So I stepped forward, and the door closed behind me. The door shut with a soft click behind me, though it sounded impossibly loud in the hush of whatever space I had just entered. I blinked, waiting for my eyes to adjust, but they didn't. The dark here wasn't just absence of light. It felt full, like a presence in itself, brushing lightly against my skin. I reached out and found walls on either side, narrow and cold. Not smooth, but lined with something textured, like peeling wallpaper or fabric-covered insulation. The air smelled faintly of old books and soil. I moved forward slowly, guided only by the thin hum beneath my feet, like electricity flowing through the floor. My fingertips skimmed the walls to orient myself. The hallway didn't turn, but it felt like it did. Angles shifting behind my steps, like a maze that changed only after you walked past it. Then, I heard breathing. Not mine. It was coming from just ahead, low, steady, unhurried. I stopped. The sound stopped too. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the space, smothered. The breathing resumed, closer now. I took another step forward, and another, until I saw him. He wasn't a ghost, he wasn't a monster. He looked like me, but wrong, paler, too still. He sat in a chair, no walls, no furnishings, just a chair suspended in the void. His hands rested on the arms like he'd been waiting for a long, long time. His eyes opened as I approached. They were mine, but dull, glassy, rimmed with sleepless shadows. "You came," he said. His voice was familiar but off in pitch, like a badly tuned recording of myself. "Who are you?" I asked, though I already knew. He tilted his head slightly. "I'm the thought that won't leave. I'm the hour you always wake up. I'm the thing you tried to bury in therapy, but your therapist kept watering." My throat tightened. "Why?" I whispered. "Why me?" "Because I watched you break," he said. "Piece by piece, I saw every crack. Every night you stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing, wondering if it was all pointless. He stood now. He wasn't threatening, but he filled the space somehow. Dr. Halverson helped you see me. She opened the door, but you built it. I stepped back. This isn't real. He took a step forward. It's more real than the stories you tell yourself to stay sane. The space grew colder. My breath fogged in front of me. I heard whispering now, not from him, not from me, but from somewhere deep below. It sounded like my voice again, layered, endless, repeating fragments of every fear I'd ever muttered aloud. "You don't belong here," I said, trying to sound firm. He smiled, and it was sad, almost gentle. "No," he said, "you don't." Then he lifted his hand and pointed behind me. I turned. There was another door, wooden, familiar, with a brass handle. Light leaked out from underneath. Warm light. I didn't remember it being there before. "You can leave," he said, "if you want, but you'll come back." I turned back to him. "Why?" His smile faded. "Because you've met me now, and once you see the shape of your own darkness, you never forget its face." I turned toward the door. My hand trembled as I touched the handle. Behind me, his voice echoed once more, soft, distant, final. The dark doesn't listen. It remembers. I opened the door and stepped through, back into Dr. Halverson's office. She was seated where she always sat. Her eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. "Well?" she asked, like nothing had happened. "What did you think?" I opened my mouth to speak, but I didn't know how to answer, because the moment I stepped through that door, I started to remember things that never happened. A house I'd never lived in. A woman I'd never married. A funeral I'd never attended, my own. She smiled, as if she could see it unraveling inside me. "Therapy," she said softly, "isn't always about forgetting pain. Sometimes it's about meeting it properly." And then she stood, walked toward that strange door. It was gone. Only smooth wall now, no seams, no hinges. "I think we've made progress," she said. "Let's continue next week." I left the office. I walked home in silence. That night, I stared into the darkness of my apartment for hours. I didn't hear voices. I understood them. And at 2:17 a.m., I woke up, walked to the mirror, and waited. Because I wasn't sure anymore which version of me had come back, or which one was still watching.